So who are these witch doctors? Well, a witch doctor is someone who quite simply treats the problem of witchery and witchcraft. So he divines and he battles witchcraft. He can diagnose witchcraft and declare it. His main task, though, is less the battling of witchcraft using medicine or using his sort of ritual techniques and the powerful substances called medicines that he's ingested and have become a part of him throughout his initiation and his training. Mostly he divines. Mostly he figures out if there is someone who is afflicted by a witchery and figures out who the witch person is. They're almost always male. Evans Pritchard has no evidence of female witch doctors. So we must ask ourselves, though, and Evans Pritchard brings this up, it's like, hey, wait a minute. If these witch doctors know so much about witches, could they be witches themselves? And there's always a little bit of a tension there. And as I'll state in a minute, all the really, really famous witch doctors, people pretty consistently like, yeah, of course that guy's a great witch doctor. He's a witch. They think kind of deep down that anyone with that much abiding knowledge about witchcraft must be a witch themselves. That doesn't make them inherently evil or not witch doctors, but they got a little witch in them, if you will. All right, so Evans Pritchard contrasts a witch doctor with a leech. Now, you probably saw this word leech, and you probably thought, an aquatic blood-sucking worm. Well, no. The earliest use of the term leech is for a doctor. So in Old English, the term leech is a physician, one who practices the healing art. Now archaic, poetic, or jocular, often apprehended as a transferred use of leech. Number two, which would be, the leech, number two is an actual leech. So in the 17th century, it was applied in ordinary prose to use only toward veterinarian practitioners. In this sense, you can see this in several dialects. So you'd have a bullock leech, a cow leech, a horse leech. So you'll come across this when you're reading sort of an older writing in English, and you'll even hear the phrase leechcraft. When you say here leechcraft, don't think it's somebody putting leeches on people. That could be. The leech and a leech is considered a physician. All right, so what is it that witch doctors do? Now, witch doctors here really overlap with kind of worldwide patterns that we see in shamanism. What's a shaman? I'm speaking very generally here because the word doesn't really work. A shaman, at the most basic level, is someone who has undergone an initiatory experience, usually having a near-death experience or a great illness, or through training is initiated. They may use psychotropic entheogens to attain states of ecstasy, being outside of themselves. But consistently, the imagery of initiation that a shaman experiences is of dying, their body being ripped apart, and then it being put together, re-put together with magic inside of it. The shaman comes back to the world outside of their trance or outside of their initiation and is able to heal people. How does a shaman heal someone? They go into trance and communicate with spirit beings, for lack of a better term. Now, let's just take a little second here and note a couple of things. Don't say anything is your spirit animal. That's one, it's dumb. But two, that's almost an exact translation of what indigenous Americans refer to as these very sacred totemic spirits that they're really connected to. Now, within neo-shamanism or new school shamanism and neo-paganism, which once upon a time I used to practice. Boo. Yeah, I told you. I used to do some religious stuff. Anyway, when I was practicing neo-shamanism, we never used the word spirit animal. We always used the term power animal. And when we talked about, so you would contact your power animal from traveling in meditation into the underworld to encounter your power animal. And then there's the middle world, which is just like this world, that's like a spirit world. And then there's the upper worlds that you travel to by ascending upward. And there you'd meet spirit guides. So just these terms are all fine. Power animal, spirit guide. But there is this sort of thing of saying this, the otter is my spirit animal. Oh, my pal Jim is my spirit animal. That don't say that, because it's kind of, well, it's not kind of, it's deeply offensive, because you're making light of a very deep religious concept. It would like sort of be like me saying, I don't know, my favorite candy is the peanut M&M. Peanut M&Ms are my Jesus, or something like that, but kind of more aggressive. Anyway, so neo-shamanism, which is what I practiced with a shaman once upon a time, was actually really got going in the 1970s by an anthropologist named Michael Harner. So he was doing research on entheogens, so plants that cause trance in the Amazon. And I believe he was taking ayahuasca, which is now a big deal. Lots of people are doing. I haven't. He took ayahuasca, and he had this really potent vision of sort of like crocodiles and long boats and people in them. And it seemed sort of timeless. It didn't seem connected to the place he was. And he talked to the different people that he was working with, and they said, you've been initiated. They said, you've had the experience in this meditation on this ayahuasca, and now it's time for you to go back and teach this to your people. And he would always say, when he says, I learned this in South America, but it is not South American. This is my experience. And I know my own shaman argued that despite all of the overlap with Indigenous American lore and whatnot, and South American lore from Michael Harner's system that my shaman Peter Richards had learned from Michael Harner, he said that he really traced his own shamanic roots way back in time to Finland. And he said he had gone on trance journeys in which he saw his ancestors in Finland. And he said that, it's very much, it's connected to, he didn't say his race, but his memory. So I always get a little weirded out when you're in sort of a shaman environment and suddenly people get a little way too into Indigenous American cultures. And that feels a little yucky and creepy to me. That's me. I had a friend who I introduced to Peter, and he went on a spirit journey, and he was an Indian fellow. And he told me that he looked down when he was in his vision and he saw himself in buckskins. So he really resonated with that Indigenous American thing. But then when he went on a different journey to meet his spirit guide, he met a yogi. So it was all kind of mixed up. And what are you doing in these trance meditations? Well, the way that I would do it, and I was trained to do it, as I listen to a drum beat, bum, 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 and I begin doing a visualization, and it's like an active imagination. I would visualize, let's say I wanted to do I would set my intention, and this is getting long, sorry. I would set my intention, and I would say, for instance, like one of the first ones that Peter taught me was, I want to go into the lower realms and meet my power animal. So with that, I would imagine myself walking, sort of like in a forest, and then imagine myself in a cave. Sometimes later, as I practiced more, I would imagine myself going down an escalator and going into like the bowels underneath a city, because I don't live in the country, I live in the city. Anyway, so you're visualizing, and you imagine yourself moving faster and faster and running. At a certain point, it's like your active imagination that you're stimulating stops and something else takes over, and it's like lucid dreaming is the closest thing I can say to it. Anybody can do it with a little bit of practice. I had a lot of trouble meeting my power animal, and Peter actually was able to do one of the things he could do, which he thought that I had some sort of a spiritual fragmentation or a soul fragment. So he went to the other world and he found my power animal, and he brought it back to me. And in another instance, he went, actually, I think it was the same one. He told me it was accompanied by a vision of soul loss. And in that vision, he saw a man who he thought was likely Tibetan. He had a feeling like you could see like long houses and sort of a lamp. And I remember the way he described it to me, it was like the image just boom, popped into my head. So vivid, I can still see it now. And it was of a man who had been killed. And Peter encountered the man, and he said, I realize that you've become fragmented from your soul. Now you are a 20-year-old man living in such and such year. It's probably 1998. And I want to bring you back to yourself. And the man stood in front of Peter, and he saw that his robe fell, and he saw a big wound on his hand, and he moved aggressively forward to Peter as if he wanted to come. And Peter brought him back to me. And I still think about those things. So that's what a shaman does. I had a little bit of a falling out with Peter Richards, because at a certain point he told me it was time for me to continue my work and start healing people. And I said, I don't want to do that. The responsibility of it seemed too much, and I didn't feel that I had the power or capability to do that. And he always said, yeah, you do. And I was like, no, I don't. Yeah, no, I don't. But yeah, sadly, the last time I talked to him was on the eve that my brother had died. And he called me up, and it was really nice to hear his voice, but he started telling me that my brother was in a better place in some way. And I just became enraged at him. And I remember yelling at him on the phone. I never talked to him again. He left us a few years back, and I'm sure he is coursing through the universe in his wonderful Peter-like ways. I miss you, Peter. All right. So anyway, what does a shaman do? Not a neo-shaman like I was talking about, but traditionally in a society, a shaman will diagnose when someone has witchcraft in them. And usually these witchcrafts in these different cultures are described as like these little nasty little darts that have been shot by a witch into you. And the dart is like a bone fragment or fur or piece of metal, something really gross. And the shaman is thought to, by their hands, to be able to pull it out of the person, the witchcraft bone darts or whatnot, or they will suck on the body, and they'll be able to sort of spit out, this nastiness. Now, invariably, this is sleight of hand. And shaman would never say we're tricking people. We'd say I'm putting the little bit of nastiness in here and doing sleight of hand to prove that it works. But it really does work. It's like, I'm just doing that to convince other people that it works. So you also see this with psychic healers, and you see it with frauds all over the place. So worldwide, we see sort of shaman types who extract funky things from the bodies of those who are suffering. Yes, this type of psychic healing, as I said, is sleight of hand, but it's thought that little bit of trickery really makes it work. I know in a number of cultures, people will rub eggs on their bodies and whatnot to remove impurities. And sometimes they'll crack the egg open. It'll be filled with grossness or blood. So think of that. That's kind of what a shaman does.